A quick warning. Due to the graphic nature of today's topic, listener discretion is advised. Topics discussed will include mental illness and treatment of the afflicted in a historical context. The views and opinions discussed on today's show may not be the views held by the hosts, but those of historical figures mentioned. As you listen, we ask that you keep in mind that one must tread with care when looking back in time and not judge the actions and opinions of others by the standards of today.
Thanks for walking me back to my dorm tonight, Charlie.
No sweat, Betty. It's a nice night for a walk.
I'm just so sorry to have to ask you. It's just that my roommate is out, and since it was so late after my last class, I missed the bus and...
Betty, just relax. I said it's no problem. I don't mind at all.
Thanks, Charlie. Say, do we really have to walk near that old asylum? That place gives me the creeps.
Betty, it's just a rundown old building. Well, except where they have renovated it for that hotel. Anyway, it's the fastest way back to campus, and the building can't hurt you. It's not an evil thing. That's where you would be wrong, young man. Holy crap! Old-timer, you scared the crap out of us. No harm given, no harm done, young man.
What? What did you say?
I said that you would be wrong to think that building can't hurt you. This one can. Lots of evil things happen in there. It is not a place for the likes of the living. Only the dead can walk those halls now, and not even free from their torment in life. Come on, Betty, let's go before this crazy dude lays on some thick bull just to get a kick at our expense.
Right. Let's go. Charlie, where did that crazy old man come from? I didn't see him walking up the street towards us.
Come to think of it, I didn't either.
Charlie, look, he's gone.
What? You're right. Where did he go? There's literally no place for that old codger to have gone on the street except further down the street. There's no one there.
Charlie, let's get out of here.
Right. Hey, trippers! Welcome to another episode of the Road Tripping Podcast. As always, it's great to have you tuning in. If this is your first episode, then welcome. If it's not your first episode, then welcome back. We just want to take this opportunity to say thank you for letting us provide you with content that helps your commute suck just a little less. It really means a lot to us to have you listening. Today's show suggestion came to us from listener Tammy E., who hails from Buffalo, New York. She writes, "Hey Dean and Molly, I just wanted to know if you guys have ever heard of the Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane. It is said to be one of New York's most haunted places. I don't know about that myself, as I personally live a few blocks away from there and have passed by it numerous times and never seen anything strange from the outside. Students living in the nearby dorms of Buffalo State, however, have claimed to see strange lights in the towers and have possibly heard otherworldly screams at night, but that could be pranksters. Currently, the police do a pretty good job at keeping people out as it is mostly abandoned, so who knows if it is pranksters or if it's something else. Keep the shows coming. I know that you are a new podcast, but I'm enjoying listening so far. Tammy." Thanks for the suggestion, Tammy, and we're glad that you're enjoying our work so far. To answer your question, no, neither I nor Molly had ever heard anything about the place until you mentioned it to us, so we appreciate you pointing us in that direction. It has been an interesting research project. If any of you listening want to submit a show suggestion like Tammy, head over to our website, theroadtrippingpodcast.com, and click on the suggestions link at the top of the page.
I would also like to say thanks to Tammy for bringing this suggestion to our attention. I found so many different threads of information to follow that I got lost easily in the research. That may sound like a bad thing, but for Dean and I, that is exactly the kind of thing we enjoy spending our time doing. So before we can talk about anything potentially paranormal, let's get a feel for the place and its history. Construction of the Richardson Olmsted campus, or as it was originally known, the Buffalo Asylum for the Insane, was built in 1872, and the process of creating the design of the facility and its grounds brought together three innovative designers and thinkers of the time. They were Henry Hobson Richardson, Frederick Law Olmsted, and Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride. Richardson was a little-known architect at the time that had recently gained a bit of fame in the area with some of his work on a local building and was granted the commission for the asylum. He eventually adopted the Romanesque style of the 11th and 12th century as his inspiration and made it his own, to become the father of the Richardsonian Romanesque architectural style that you can see on display in other pieces of his works, like the famous Trinity Church in Boston and the New York State Capitol. He was also the first American-born architect to achieve international fame. Olmsted was an established landscape architect that had been a lead designer of the New York Central Park, as well as creating park systems in Wisconsin, Kentucky, and a few other localities. During his career, Olmsted and his firm carried out some 500 commissions. They included 100 public parks and recreational grounds, 200 private estates, 50 residential communities and subdivisions, and campus designs for 40 academic institutions. Kirkbride was the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane in Philadelphia and the founder of the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, which was a precursor for the American Psychiatric Association. Richardson and Olmsted were following the direction of Kirkbride in the development of the asylum, based on other institutions, following the philosophy of Kirkbride for treating the mentally ill. The goal of the Kirkbride philosophy was to bring an enlightened and humane approach to the treatment of the mentally ill through exposure to natural light, proper air circulation, privacy, and, where possible, views that should exhibit life in its active forms. In fact, Kirkbride's philosophy even suggested the building's layout, staffing, and size of the grounds were all part of the curative effect for patients. His philosophy was so well thought of at this time in history that a total of 73 Kirkbride planned hospitals were constructed throughout the United States, as well as influencing facility designs and treatments in both Canada and Australia. This form of treatment was known as the Moral Method and was meant to treat, not confine people.
Originally, the entire campus of the Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane was comprised of 11 buildings, multiple parks and gardens, and a 100-acre farm, all on the allotted 203 acres. The plan was to house and treat up to 600 patients and the 71 administrators and staff required to run the facility. When the site was built, the city of Buffalo had given New York State use of the property, which was then on the outskirts of the city, which was ideal for Kirkbride. The building itself was built in a V formation, almost like a flock of birds, with two 185-foot towers rising out of the center of the main building. The V consisted of two diverging series of wards or pavilions. If you were a new arrival, you would arrive at the administrative offices at the center of the V, where all the administrators were located. From there, patients would be segregated by gender, men going to one side, women to the other, and then further segregated by condition, according to 4 distinct levels of need. Patients requiring the most care would be housed the furthest away from the center. This meant that as you improved, you would literally move toward the exit. Since each of the pavilions would be set back slightly from the last, every room in the hospital would receive maximum ventilation and sunlight throughout the day. The narrowed points of contact between sections also protected against fire by making it easier to seal off any one part of the facility from the others. In its early decades, the Buffalo State Asylum was an acute care facility. Patients were encouraged but not forced to assist in the upkeep of the farm or in other domestic chores such as the kitchen or laundry. If a patient could assist with chores that suited their occupation in their pre-admission life, they were encouraged to do so as part of their therapy. The bedrooms were also small, to encourage patients to not spend time in them, but to be out being social. Keep in mind, trippers, there wasn't a lot they could do for mental illness at the time in the way of medications, so the idea was to make things as calm for the afflicted as possible. The idea was to make the asylum feel like a Victorian home. Each ward was supposed to be structured like an ideal Victorian family unit. The doctor would have meals with them sitting at the head of the table to model the ideal Victorian father, while the nurse sat at the other end of the table as the mother, and not like a prison for the poor like many institutions in the past had become.
Hello, Trippers. Do you have a podcast that you want to cross-promote? Or are you a business with a product that you would like to advertise? Then reach out to us at theroadtrippingpodcast.com to see how we can help. Your success is our success, so let us succeed together by getting the word out about your product or show to other listeners and potential consumers.
Now back to the show.
Now that we've talked about the site and the original plan for treating the patients, who, let's face it, were mainly from families with wealth, we can move on to how things actually transpired and why people say the facility was haunted. The economy of Buffalo waxed and waned through the early 1890s, and soon the original wealthy patrons began fleeing to private hospitals. This led to the state bringing in more and more patients from outside smaller hospitals. Around the 1890s, although the institution was designed to house 600 patients, overcrowding soon became a problem. And by the turn of the 19th century, the facility was treating 3,600 patients at any one time. The increase in numbers also had to do with the fact that during this time, mental illness was beginning to be taken more serious by the medical community, and laws were passed that removed those deemed insane from the poorhouses and sent them to the asylum instead for treatment, putting even a greater strain on the already overburdened, understaffed, and undertrained personnel working at the facility. There were also more definitions and diagnosis of what mental illness was, which increased the number of patients needing treatment. Don't forget, though, that the more people were treated and considered cured by the asylum, the more money the facility earned, so greed may have also had a hand in the overcrowding as well. It's hard to say exactly what the exact success rate of the asylum was, because the doctors reported their own numbers, and things like death might have been counted as a cure to keep up appearances and bolster intake numbers. Newspaper articles from the time tell a different story, though. Brutes in an Insane Asylum, a story of cruelty from the State Asylum at Buffalo, was the headline of an article in the New York Times on the morning of February 7, 1881. The article describes a pattern of severe physical abuse and terrible cruelties toward patients who were too noisy or slow in entering the dining room. Stories of blackened eyes, near drownings, and forced sterilizations, as well as attempts to cover up the violence. One staff member even threatened to pound a patient to death if he reported the abuse to the superintendent. That was, from what I could tell, the first time the New York Times published a report on the abusive treatment in the Buffalo State Asylum. But these articles show up again and again for decades. As if that wasn't enough, patients with infectious diseases like tuberculosis was a major health threat in most American cities at the time and posed a significant problem to public institutions were lumped in with the insane. Another infectious disease which was a problem at the Buffalo State Asylum well into the 20th century was neurosyphilis. Malaria therapy was used to treat patients with neurosyphilis during the 1920s. Patients with tertiary syphilis were infected with malaria, which would cure the syphilis and then be treated for malaria. This treatment was used until the discovery of penicillin in the 1940s. Insulin shock therapy, a precursor to the electroconvulsive therapy, emerged for the treatment of schizophrenia, known then as dementia praecox. As early as the 1930s, surgical solutions for schizophrenia were utilized. Although there were some lobotomies performed, neurosurgery was not commonly used there. The mid-20th century saw an increase in pharmaceutical treatments used for a number of mental illnesses, including schizophrenia, mania, and other psychosis. Chlorpromazine, Thorazine, was among the medicines most used up until its closing in 1975.
Death at the facility was not an uncommon occurrence. According to the annual reports issued by the Board of Charities, more than 13,000 patients died at the asylum from 1880 until 1959. Some died suddenly of acute conditions, while others had chronic or contagious diseases. Some patients died of injuries, and others committed suicide. The question of where they were buried is often asked by historians, and the response has always been, in local cemeteries. There were rumors that there may have been a cemetery on the grounds of the asylum, somewhere on the northern edge, but there is no evidence to support that legend. It was hard to find specific tales of encounters, and calls to local groups in New York didn't lead to much either. The only tale we could track down occurred sometime during the renovation construction in and around 2006, when part of the site was being repurposed into a hotel and event center, now known as the Hotel Henry, during its decade of reconstruction work on the complex. Many workers reported hearing the sound of people crying out for help in the otherwise empty building. Tools would go missing, and there were even reports of shadow figures running around the upper floors. Some claimed to feel a sense of anxiety and fear just upon entering the building itself. The only other tales we could find easily could just be creepypasta tales, but we were going to let you hear it anyway since you stuck with the show this far. The first story goes that some teenagers had snuck into the facility and that they encountered a vicious spirit by the name of Alice. They claimed to have heard her yell that she will hurt them all, and within moments of encountering Alice, they felt sick to their stomachs and vomited. The second and more malevolent tale comes from a few residents who are said to have snuck into the facility and used a spirit box to communicate with Alice. For those that don't know, a spirit box is an audio-only device that rapidly scans through multiple audio channels that is said to make it relatively easy for ghosts to manipulate to say a word or phrase in real time. They claim that the words fear, death, and run came up over and over again, but when they asked who they should run from, the word him was shouted through the spirit box a moment later. It wasn't too much later after this that the group noticed a misty apparition at the end of the hall. A loud demonic-sounding growl emanated from the apparition, causing part of the group to flee. The ones who didn't asked who he was. The response was another terrifying growl, and the name Beelzebub could be heard on the spirit box.
Trippers, we will host the images we've gathered up during our research of the Buffalo State Asylum in our blog section, which we call Headlights, on our website. It is a beautiful old building, and the grounds are incredible still to this day. It is considered such an important building that it was named to the National Register of Historic Places in 1973, and then as a National Historic Landmark, one of only 2,500 in 1986, which is the highest distinction that can be awarded to a property.
Well, that is all the time we have for this episode of the Road Tripping Podcast. But if you liked it and want to hear more, please subscribe to the show feed and give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast directory. The more positive reviews we receive, the more trippers will be able to find us, and the faster we will grow, thus able to bring you new content. Be sure to visit our website, theroadtrippingpodcast.com, to keep updated on future shows, leave new show suggestions, and see all the ways to find and interact with us all in one place. If you are able and are feeling generous, then a link to our Patreon can be found under the support link on the homepage. As always, until next time we meet, stay safe, trippers.